thank you for joining us here today for this wonderful session that we're going to put on. Truly, without further ado, because I don't want to take up time, we want to get into the actual topic today. I just want to pass it over to my colleague, Derek Luyten from the U.S. Congress House Democracy Partnership to open us up with some welcome remarks. Derek, I pass the floor to you, sir.
Thank you so much. And Alisha, I always appreciate the fact that you can wake anyone up, whether it's a Monday morning or a Wednesday morning, with a lot of joy and happiness. You can make any Zoom fun. So thank you. My name is Derek Luyten. I am the executive director of something called the House Democracy Partnership. I think some of you are familiar and some of you I know, and I have met recently, perhaps at a program in Miami or elsewhere. We are a really great commission within the United States Congress that works to advance the best practices and principles of good governance and democracy and governance writ large. We love our mission. It's really, truly fantastic, and it gives us a great opportunity to work with individuals such as yourselves, decision makers who matter and who need to have the best tools available to them, best practices from around the world. And in this case, AI, technology, what's actually going on with this incredible new, I would say, toolbox is truly fascinating. And it's one that I think is leveling the playing field across the world. Something that our Congress, I'll say the United States Congress is great in many ways. It needs improvement in many ways, and it's also behind in other ways. And I think in technology and AI and how it's being used effectively and proactively is something that the United States still has a lot to learn from. And so individuals like Marci Harris are truly great gems in that they can help us navigate some of the pitfalls. We know we don't only want to associate some of this technology with negatives, but really the great positives that it can really afford us. And so with that, Ms. Ford, I appreciate being called young. It makes me feel young. You are young at heart, and that's the same thing. But with that, I will just say thank you to Alisha for including us in this. It's always a pleasure to associate the House Democracy Partnership with ParlAmericas and with POPVOX. And so with that, Marci, I'm here to learn as well. I appreciate your time. And please elucidate us on everything that is AI.
And such an honor to be with you all. I will confess that I am coming to you from an airport lounge, so I apologize in advance for background noise. And it is just the inevitable inevitable situation. As Derek mentioned, I'm a former congressional staffer in the U.S. Congress, and our organization at POPVOX Foundation, we are constantly working with the U.S. Congress to try to help it update its processes and tools and understanding of emerging technologies so that it can operate as efficiently and effectively for the American people. And over the past couple of years, especially with the growth of generative AI, that has meant, as Derek said, learning a lot from other parliaments, because we are in by no means leading the we are doing well, but there are certainly other parliaments that we have a lot to learn from, and really all of us are starting at the same place. This is so new, and the questions are so big, and the opportunities are so big, and the challenges are so big that it really is a place where we need to work together. So I was so honored to be with Alisha and Derek and all the teams down in Miami with many members of parliament from the Caribbean. We started the conversation there and realized that there were lots of reasons that we should continue the collaboration and information sharing. And so today's session is really a basic introduction to AI, commercially available tools, how to use them in some basic parliamentary functions, and we'll introduce some concepts and some examples from other legislatures that may make sense for later webinars, because again, there is just so much to cover on this topic. So with that, unless there are questions, I am very happy to jump in and share slides and get going. Please, as I go along, feel free to drop your questions in chat. If you ask about something that I'm going to cover a little later, I may not answer it immediately because I know it's coming, but really I want this session to be interactive and very responsive to your needs, your concerns, your workflows, And also we can continue the conversation well after this webinar is done. So I am sharing. I'm not 100% convinced that my first slide, which includes a video, is going to work, but we'll see.
Finally, tonight's Heart of America. Virginia Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton made history today, delivering what is believed to be the first speech from the House floor using a voice cloned by artificial intelligence. She was diagnosed last year with a rare neurological disorder that robbed her of the ability to speak clearly. Wexton and her team spent weeks compiling clips of her previous speeches to generate an AI model of her voice. Today, she used her time to advocate for people living with disabilities and to honor the Americans with Disabilities Act.
I hope I can be a voice, even an AI voice, for Americans facing accessibility challenges and other disabilities, because too often people only see us for that disability, and in truth, we are so much more.
Such an important message. Representative Jennifer Wexton of Virginia, tonight's Heart of America.
So the reason I wanted to start with that story is because I think that it is not the normal use case that we think of when we think about artificial intelligence, and certainly in a parliamentary context. But what I love about this example is that in so many ways, this was technology making Representative Wexton better able to communicate with humans, almost augmenting her ability to be more human. So I think with this example, I just want us to think about that throughout this conversation. The important role that you as members of Parliament and others who support this work serve will never be replaced by AI, but there are certainly ways that these new tools can augment your work and potentially provide resources that help you ideally spend more time on the people side. So we'll start just with setting the framework, the definition from the OECD, which was revised in 2023, of artificial intelligence as a machine-based system that infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs, such as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions that can influence physical or virtual environments. Okay, great, good in the weeds explanation. But why should members of Parliament care? These are just some of the reasons that we're starting to see these tools can be leveraged in the parliamentary environment to improve workflows, to make parliaments more efficient, to help under-resourced, overtaxed staff and elected officials be able to be more efficient. And the last one that I circled is this notion of keeping up with the rapid changes in society and the changing expectations of your constituents. And this is for our organization, POPVOX Foundation. This is really kind of our purpose in doing this work. We want to ensure that democratic institutions can keep up with how quickly technology is changing. And that means technology is going really quickly, exponentially, and sometimes our policy is much slower. So unless we make significant changes and really put an effort in to keep up, to change, to adopt new tools, that gap grows every year. So this work and this webinar and these ongoing conversations are really an attempt for us to help close that pacing problem gap. And I always point out that for legislatures, there are actually 3 pacing problems. Sorry, folks. There's the external, which I'm sure you're all feeling, this need to understand new technologies, new situations, so that you can make laws that appropriately address them. That's the external pacing problem. And it's like needing to get a new degree every year as quickly as things are changing. There's the interbranch pacing problem, which I think is a little bit more pronounced in presidential systems than in parliamentary systems, just because we have such separation between the legislative branch and the executive branch that carries out the laws. And so it's very difficult to ensure that the legislative branch keeps up with the agencies that it's charged with overseeing. But then there's the internal pacing problem, which is how well are members of parliament and parliaments themselves using modern technology for their own work? And that's the one we're going to talk about today. If I can advance my slides. Oh, there we go. So just to touch on a few examples of AI, and some of these you're probably already using within your parliaments. Predictive modeling is something that's been around since the 80s, and in many cases happens with a series of formulas in Excel sheets to use algorithms to process data and make predictions based on patterns from historical data about what comes next. And so if you're doing budget projections or other types of projections using predictive modeling, that's a little bit of an early form of an AI. And then machine learning and natural language processing are two types of AI that have really kind of become more prominent over the past 10 to 20 years. And again, these use algorithms and statistical models to help computers perform tasks without explicit instructions. So kind of goal-based computation. And natural language processing you recognize from chat-based systems or text or voice-based systems, computer vision. If you have a system that recognizes your face as you sign in, that's part of this these forms of AI. But what we are all talking about now, following the release of ChatGPT in November of 2022, is generative AI, or large language models. And these are models trained on tons and tons and tons of information that are basically predicting what comes next. So like this, predicting what comes next based on statistical probability. This is actually the magic that powers these large language models that we're talking about. I love this little cartoon that illustrates how sometimes we think we can predict the word that comes next, but not always. And that is the case with these large language models. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they don't. But this is my attempt to explain the kind of the underlying mechanics, just so you get your mind around how it all works. So you'll hear a lot of reference to a model. And the model itself is really just that system of algorithms and math that is trained on a ton of data to perform a specific task. And that data that it's trained on can include books or web data or government texts or code. And for the most part, many of the models that we'll talk about today have ingested almost everything on the internet, which means that they have some of the pathologies of some of the things that are on the internet. So it's important to always be cognizant that this is not always trained on the most erudite sources. So the training data is the information that's used to teach the AI to recognize patterns, to make predictions, to generate outputs. And one thing that's important to keep in mind for all of these models is the data that they were trained on is not updating daily. So one of the things that you need to keep in mind as you're using these tools is what is their training window, or what is their cutoff window? So for example, I think the current OpenAI model has a cutoff window of something like, let's say June of 2024. So it doesn't know anything that happened after June of 2024. It doesn't know about the recent US election. It doesn't know about all of the really interesting things that have happened in the world over the past several months. So if you are engaging with it, you are going to need to provide some additional information for it to process and be up to date with the recommendations that it gives you. And the interfaces of the model are basically how you engage with it. So you can write a text and receive text back. In some cases, you can use an app that you can speak into and it will speak back to you. You can upload an image or a document or ask it to produce an image or a document. There are even models now that produce videos, that have ingested videos, etc. These many different modes are called multimodal models, a mouthful, just meaning that they have taken in lots of information in different forms and they can produce information in different forms for you. One of the things to remember as you're interacting with these models is that what you're putting in, unless you have terms of service and have checked a privacy option, what you're putting in can become part of the training data. And that might be great if you are putting in information about your country's laws or recent public debates, or even your biographical information that's public and you want it to have good information about you. But it is also why it's very important to not enter private information or information that regards national security or your constituents, or even something that you're just thinking about that hasn't been public yet. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Before I move on, are there any questions?
Yes, please. I wanted to ask about the cutoff window. You said that information you can put it in up to a certain point, but can you adjust the cutoff window at any point, or is it a one-off? Once you put it in, that's it.
That's a wonderful question. So the cutoff window really applies to the underlying model. So the training of the underlying model. When you are engaging in a conversation with the model, it is going to remember everything that you put into it during that conversation. So during that conversation, you can add a new document, you can add information about what's going on in the world, you can add information about yourself, and that will be retained for your conversation. And then it's something that the company or the host of the model may incorporate into the corpus of its training data later, but it's not an instant update. So if you add information, it's not like tomorrow that is now part of the underlying training data for the model. Does that make sense? And there are ways that you can make your own information accessible on an ongoing basis. We'll touch on that a little bit, but that is probably kind of a second phase of talking through what's possible with some of these models. Okay, Derek and Alisha, please just jump in if I don't see it on chat. Yes.
Sorry. Is there a way a recipient can identify an AI-generated document or speech?
Not so there are some tools out there that purport to review for whether something was generated by AI or not. Famously, there's an organization called Turnitin that reviews assignments that are submitted for high school or college courses to tell you whether the students used AI to write their papers. But most of those tools are now returning a lot of false positives. So there really is concern now that it is very difficult to actually discern whether something was generated, purely by a human or some combination, or purely by an AI. So it is becoming increasingly difficult. And there are certainly tells. So sometimes you read something and you think this is the words all sound good, but there's no spirit here, and it's almost like your human intuition is the best read of that right now, but it is increasingly difficult to tell the difference.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Tracy, did you have a question?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My question is related to the one that was asked just now, because Our colleague asked whether it is possible to identify a document that has been generated by AI. Now, I work in the committee division where we prepare quite a lot of minutes and reports, which means a lot of written information, which we do sometimes use AI tools, specifically Otter, to help us to process and compile. And therefore, my question is this: why would it be important to identify whether or not AI had been used to generate a document, considering that it is our aim at this stage in the history of the evolution of the world to get to that kind of assistance?
I think it's such a good question. And I think we are really starting to see a bit of that convergence where for some of us, we use it so often that it's almost an extension of us, and we see it's like a calculator doing math for us. You don't have to reveal that you didn't actually do the long form. But I do think in certain situations, like homework, I will say as a professor, it would be great if there were a way to know the difference. But I am increasingly seeing that that is not possible, and that the risk of accusing a student who didn't use AI of using AI, this has happened in several cases, is also pretty significant. So it's a really interesting time for some of these questions. But you know, as members of Parliament, as administrators within institutions, of course, it is always the case that you are responsible for what you send out in an email or say in a speech or sign on a document. So I think ultimately that human responsibility, regardless of who or how the words were formed, the final human review is really where you know who's responsible if it works or it doesn't work. Let's see.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. One of the things that we had on the list to talk about today is really to try to make sure that that you feel familiar with the existing commercial models. This is kind of step one for playing with these new tools and understanding how they work, that then makes you better prepared for what is essentially the next stage of thinking how these types of tools could be customized for your specific use cases in the Parliament. So it is probably not the case that your ongoing experience of working with AI will be through these interfaces, but working with them now helps you really understand what is possible, and also helps you then, as your institution begins to plan how it should build or procure or design tools specific to your uses, you will be better informed to be a part of that process. So these are really the most prominent models that are out there today. So I think probably you've all heard at least a little bit about OpenAI, the first company that released a chat-based interface for its model. There is another company that runs a bit of a similar service. It was actually started by former employees of OpenAI, and that is Anthropic, which has a model that it calls Claude. And I say a model, but both OpenAI has several different models. Anthropic has several different models, and these are just different ways that its algorithms are designed to work, because they are also figuring out what the optimal design of these models and interfaces are. Google has released Gemini, which is its model. And you'll notice that all of these have both a free option and a paid option, and they're pretty competitive with each other. They're around about $20 a month. And then I put on here also 2 open source models that probably this won't be the first ones that you're engaging with, but it's just important to know that these models are out there, and the fact that they are open source means that you could download them onto your own system and use them without having to go out and continue to pay to use someone else's commercial model. You could begin to update and train this model with your own preferences and information, etc. But again, that may be a topic for a later conversation. But Facebook has the Llama model, and the Mistral, a French company, has its own open source model. So with that, I thought we might actually just play with some of the models and kind of demonstrate some actual use cases. It is always dangerous to do a live demo, but we're gonna do it. And I wanted to just kind of browse through for a minute what you can expect to see from each of these models when you go to their pages, and I can follow up with Alisha and Derek and give you web addresses for each of these. So this is the interface of ChatGPT. I actually am a paid customer for this, so it gives me options of a few different models. Then this would be the front page of Anthropic Claude. I also have the pro plan on this one. I like to make them compete with each other. And this is what its front page looks like. You can see all of them start out with this very friendly, like, how can we help you today? And it's really a prompt to just enter a chat. This is Gemini's front page. I haven't upgraded, so I don't have the pro version of Gemini. You can also experiment with Meta's Llama model here. And you can see it's prompting you to different ways that you could use it. And then I also wanted to flag, because I know many of you may have Microsoft-based systems, that Microsoft Copilot is actually available in Microsoft 365. It currently is using OpenAI's model. So it's like a Microsoft interface. The backend is OpenAI's model. But you can access OpenAI tools through Microsoft 365 if that is something that's available to you in your institution. So in thinking about how to use these LLMs in your work, this is our team's most frequent advice that we share, which is treat it like an eager intern, like a really smart intern that is very excited to please you and will work very hard and be very diligent, but they don't come with a lot of applied knowledge. They have, they studied really hard in school and they have, all of the background information that they can access. But as far as the real understanding of your day-to-day, they don't know it. You're going to have to tell them, and you're going to have to check their work. So if you can just think about the outputs of these models as an eager intern, you will understand that they're very helpful, but also that you got to check their work. And Alisha and Derek, if you don't mind, if there are questions that it would be helpful to address as we go, please feel free to jump in and flag them. Otherwise, I'll just keep powering through. The other thing to remember, kind of as I was mentioning, there is this training data cutoff. So the models don't come pre-baked with the knowledge that you need them to have. And you shouldn't rely on their pre-existing knowledge. So especially for your context, they do have access to probably your legal code and maybe some general information about the governing systems in your country, but probably not up to date. So we'll go through a few examples in just a minute of how you can upload the documents that you would like the model to consider as it's providing a summary or analysis, etc. You can be very specific about the tone and the length that you would like to have as a part of the output that you're requesting. So, you could even say you're writing a memo for a member of parliament from Barbados, and a population that cares about X, Y, and Z. And you can put all of that in as a part of the prompt and then say, write a 5-minute speech on this topic in this voice. And so really feel empowered to give it instructions as specifically as you can. As I mentioned before, though, be cautious with sensitive information. Don't put in the names or addresses of your constituents or anything that is not public. Avoid over-reliance. As we discussed, you are ultimately responsible for anything that you are releasing, saying, sending. You know this. Fact check assertions. Again, this is an eager intern. Sometimes they want to please you so much that they make up what they think you'd like to hear as opposed to a fact-based analysis, which is why you always want to double check what you get and also provide the source information that they should be looking at. Also explain the parliamentary context. This is just not always baked into the models, although I think you'll notice that like Claude and OpenAI, they're getting better and you can kind of play them off of each other. And the question about being transparent about usage, I think that was actually a really good discussion before. How much is appropriate to share when you're using these tools in your work? We've actually had a lot of speeches on the House floor in the US Congress or hearing questions written by these models, and the members have been very proud to explain that they received assistance from these tools. So sometimes it can be a little bit of a part of your shtick as you're experimenting. Okay, let's jump in with some examples. I'm very nervous. I have to get my Zoom screen out of the way so that I can see it all. Okay. So actually, yeah. So thinking about what you may, the kinds of issues that you are interacting with and, the types of things that you can ask it to help you with. I think some of these tasks are pretty intuitive, including analyzing proposed legislation's impact or providing legislative options or summarizing a big policy. So I actually was going to show you one that I was playing around with earlier. I was on the Jamaica Parliament's document center, and I saw this revised comprehensive motor vehicle policy for the public sector. And I thought, that sounds really complicated and difficult to get through. So if I were a member of Parliament, would I want to read that thing start to finish? Probably not. So maybe having an LLM help me understand the policy would be helpful. So I dropped it into ChatGPT and I'm going to ask it to please summarize this policy. And so what's important there is that I have given it the document that I want it to look at. I haven't just asked it what is the motor vehicle policy of the Parliament of the public sector of Jamaica. And so you can see it's going through and providing a summary of the whole policy. And that is still a lot of information. That is still a lot of detail that I don't necessarily need for my own decision making. So I'm just going to say, I'm a minister and want to buy a car. What should I do? Okay, so this starts to be a little bit more helpful, right? Telling me the steps that I need to take in order to abide by the policy while purchasing the car, what the restrictions are, etc. Of course, you would want to make sure that it's giving you accurate information, so you would need to go back and read through the policy and double check. But I would find this a great starting point for dealing with that policy. Similarly, I was over on, let's see, the Parliament of Barbados website, which massive kudos on listing all of the bills that are before the House and Senate here. And thought it would be interesting to experiment with the cybercrime bill. And this is really a robust page that even allows public comment on the bill, which was really helpful for playing around with this. So I downloaded the document and do it again just to be nice and fresh. And this time I'll go over to Claude and I will drop that document into Claude and say, please summarize this bill. Which, gives a nice summary. That's helpful. But maybe, I'm going to be voting on this bill. And so I actually would like to consider some of that public input that we saw down here. And remember, so this is not sensitive information because people have chosen to share this this input publicly on the website of the Parliament. So I think in this case, it's okay to drop it into the model. So let's see, I'm just going to copy it all. These models will take a lot of information. Oh, I could do a see more there. Okay. So I am copying the input into Claude and saying, please analyze the public input on this bill and identify any issues that need to be addressed. So then I just pasted all of that I copied off the website into Claude and we'll let it crunch. And so now you see a summary of the concerns that were expressed in those comments, but maybe I want a little bit more detail. So I may say, now please address each concern with a quote from the comment and analysis of how it is addressed or not in the bill. And you can see you're getting some pretty detailed information there of both the concern that was expressed, like freedom of speech or vague definitions. One of the commenters says Part 9 imposes a fine of da-da-da, even if the data is completely factual in the public interest. But then the Claude is going to look at the bill and says the bill defines intimidate in Section 19, but perhaps the concerns are valid as definitions like causing substantial emotional distress could be subjective. So you certainly shouldn't look at the analysis of this LLM as definitive. It is not a lawyer or your legislative counsel. But if you are a lawmaker considering, possible amendments to this bill or questions you'd like to ask in a hearing, this could be really helpful analysis for some further reflection. And then I'm going to show you one of the tools that I have found most helpful, which is using Claude, and OpenAI will do this too, to help visualize how a bill would work. So please create a decision tree for this bill showing all points. I'll just say a decision tree for this bill that I can open in Mermaid. And that's a tool that I'll show you in just a minute. So you can see over here, it's generating code, and you do not need to feel intimidated by the fact that it's generating the code over there. It created its own decision tree, which you could actually just view here in Claude. But I actually like to come over and copy this code and drop it into a tool called Mermaid, which again, I'll leave all of these tools with Alisha. Okay, so then you can see it has created a decision tree for this bill that shows you the way that this law would be implemented once passed. So there's suspected cybercrime activity. And then the next question would be, is it computer access? If the answer is no, then you would follow this decision tree. Is it data related? If no, then is it a communication? If yes, then what is the nature of the communication? Yep. If it's a malicious crime, then go to section 19, where the possible punishment would be $70,000 fine or 7 years. No, if it's cyberbullying, go to section 20. If it's child exploitation, section 16 through 18, et cetera. So you can see how this ability to view the substance of the bill and the process of implementation is just a new way of looking at the work that you already do. And probably some of you have tried to draw it out for legislation that you're working on in the past. So I think that's just an example of the kinds of things that become really useful. You know, you can also ask it to write you a speech, write a letter to a constituent, or, you know, back to these kinds of tasks to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the legislation with regards to various groups, analyze constituent feedback, etc. So again, what's important about what we just talked about is that you are entering the source information into the model. You're not just asking it a question to answer from its training data. So I want to stop for a minute. There are a few questions in the chat.
Yes, please.
And yes, and a very good one from Sharifa Bashir from the Parliament of Curacao, asking, what are the biggest challenges in collecting training data for a language which is less represented online? And this is such an important question. And it really is something that these, you know, several of the models are placing high importance on. There's also a project called Community Voice undertaken by the Mozilla Foundation, which I'm happy to share a link to it. I think they would love to work with you to share resources in the various languages, to the extent, especially the public information is available, because they are working to preserve this information and make it more available. So that is Mozilla Foundation's Community Voice initiative that has a specific mission to increase the access to underrepresented languages in these models.
Yes, please. I have a question.
Yes.
With Farrell from the Parliament of Barbados Library. Does the AI have an audio component? Because I might have a client that is visually impaired, and although I've put in the source, what I saw you doing was typing in your research parameters. So does it have an audio component that they can speak and receive information back?
Yes, I love that you asked that question. So the one that I have worked with the most is ChatGPT's app. I've got my blur on, so let me see if I can eliminate that. And maybe not. But yeah, I think I found. Okay, this may work better. So you can see this is the ChatGPT app. You can also see I need to charge my battery. I don't know how well you're going to be able to hear this when I do it. And but you can use that little button there to actually talk to it and ask it for information. So let's see. When was the Parliament of Barbados established? Oh no, it's not going to perform for me now. But at any rate, I'm happy to send a link to the mobile chat because that does allow you to interact verbally with the chat. It is a little bit harder to, I mean, you can, the verbal chat that you have is captured in the written chat if you're logged in. So you could actually go to the written chat, upload documents, and then use the verbal chat to on your phone to interact with it. So it's getting much more flexible, and I think it will work better, even better in the future. I also want to address a question from Claudia Vega from ParlAmericas asking about, I think you're conveying the question from someone else, but asking about bias in these models. And of course, that is a very real concern. You are essentially getting what is in the training data. And that is why it is so important in your prompt. So in the instructions you're giving it, to be very clear what you want out of it. And of course, also to double check the results, but you know, making sure that your request is for the system to create an answer based on information that you're giving it, not just what it got on Reddit, is especially important in the parliamentary context. So you being the source of the information it's drawing from is really key. There's a good question from Jonathan Joseph about trusting the models that are available. And I guess it kind of means, what do you mean by trust? So as much as you would trust your intern, I guess is the way I would put it. Not that they are malicious, but that they may just not know what they're talking about or not have full information or full context. And so it's less about being concerned that you're being misled for a malicious purpose, but you might be being misled just because the model really wants to give you an answer, but it doesn't actually know. And that's where it is really important for you to be providing the information that it's drawing from, rather than just trying to access information that's in its training data. So I'll share again, and please continue to drop the questions in. These are so helpful. And I know one of the questions is, okay, but you know, how are some of these leading edge parliaments using AI? And you may be familiar with at least the World e-Parliament report, which came out in October. And then there was also, or maybe it was September, and there was also a report from the Law Library of Congress. So two recent reports with an overview of how parliaments around the world are leveraging these technologies. And so I thought, well, let's ask Claude and ChatGPT to analyze these reports. So what you see here is the way that I uploaded these two reports to ChatGPT and said, based on these two reports, what are good examples of how parliaments around the world are using AI for their work? And you can see examples from Brazil with a link to the page in both the World e-Parliament report and the Library of Congress report. India, where they're using AI for real-time transcription of parliamentary proceedings, and also language translation. It's very impressive in India how they are translating into all of their dialects. The Israeli Knesset, that's using a speech-to-text system for verbatim records, and it sounds like that's also happening in a few of the parliaments in the Caribbean, Italy, Ukraine, etc. So this is how ChatGPT processed those reports, and of course you could interact with them more and ask for more details. And then, here's an example of how Claude processed those two reports, a little bit different list structure, but for the most part, you can see that it's pulling out similar data. This is why I subscribe to both of them, because I like to compare the two with each other. And for each of these, you could go deeper and ask more questions and for more examples and for a list of how that might apply to your situation. So the way that I think about how parliaments are experimenting with and will adopt these tools is, in the old days, you had machine learning and natural language processing applications. You may have some already deployed in your parliament. We have, for example, the comparative print tool in the US House of Representatives. That required many, many years, hiring an outside developer, testing, launching, approving, procuring, all the things. It was a big government contract in a traditional sense. Then there's commercial off-the-shelf software that leverages AI. So like your Microsoft technology right now actually has AI systems in it. So you don't have to go use an external tool. You can actually just enable it in Google Docs. You can access Gemini, or in Microsoft, you can access ChatGPT, and in some other third-party applications already, whether if you're using Airtable or HubSpot or some of these other tools, they are incorporating different AI models into their systems. And then also, now I think we're at this stage of using third-party generative AI tools for basic tasks. And I think what comes next is that our institutions will begin developing custom apps, either in-house or with a contractor, or perhaps in a consortium together, tools that use the back end of these commercial models, but are designed for a specific parliamentary use case. And then maybe the last stage is building from those open source AI models that we talked about, like Meta's LLM, or excuse me, Llama or Mistral or others, to really start to train a specialized model on your very specific data, so that these models are very specifically attuned to your country's needs, your parliament's needs, and very specific to you. Alisha, did you have a question?
I did. I'm absolutely here learning with everyone. So I have a question because I'm very cognizant of the idea that we need to be wary of putting personal data into these public models. And yet I'm acknowledging that I have access to Copilot app professional, like through my Microsoft 365, and it's prompting me to say that it can definitely scroll through my emails and like summarize things for me and stuff like that. And it's just to understand, and I have not read the 20-page terms and conditions. Do you know, like, because of that pro model or the way it's integrated, what is sort of the privacy around allowing Copilot Pro to access my email, like to integrate with my Microsoft 365 kind of other apps and etc. That's a question I have.
Yeah, so not legal advice, and all disclaimers apply. So, I think Microsoft and Google and some of these other big providers, they really understand that this is their opportunity. If they can build trust and provide these solutions within the enterprise systems that people are either already using or are considering, and address those privacy concerns, that is a big market that they would like to keep, as opposed to you going out and building your own, or using other models where you can have more assurance of your private information. So while I think even some countries or parliaments or institutions arrangements with these companies may be specific to their situations, I know I know of some parliaments that are continuing to negotiate how that will work. Also, some of these tools have the ability to turn off certain of the functions. Sometimes that limits the functionality because, of course, if it's in all of your emails and things like that, then it can provide a lot of insight. But if you have already gone through your public procurement process and are approved to use Outlook, which is obviously accessing all of your emails and things like that, it is probably not a huge next step for whoever it is with your cybersecurity team or your privacy team or your legal team to start the process of reviewing what it would mean to enable some of these additional tools. But I think a lot of institutions are still working their way through what that means. I'll tell you, in the US, we have a very specific concern, which is our Constitution's speech or debate clause, which means that anything that happens in the legislative branch cannot be accessed by the executive branch for judicial proceedings. So, but if it lives with a third-party company, it potentially could be accessed by subpoena. So making sure that any service provider to the legislative branch is also covered by the speech or debate clause is a really important legal component to legislative branch procurement, and others may have some similar concerns. Should there be specific laws governing the use of AI in Parliament? And if so, which aspects should be regulated? So I am really, this is a personal opinion. All of you are all the policymakers, and we'll be balancing lots of questions on this. My personal opinion is that, especially right now, especially given that pacing problem that we discussed, the most important thing for members of Parliament and institutions right now is to play with these tools so that they can understand how they work, the pros and cons, and get your mind around them so that when it is time to make a policy decision, you have a much better grasp of the magnitude of what we're talking about. Or when it's time to procure a system, a much better understanding of what is possible and what is needed and what you think is important to see in that agreement. I see Leo Cato here. So we have some computer experts in the audience. Can you comment on the strengths and weaknesses of the 5 AI tools in the presentation? You know, I don't know yet. So I keep playing them against each other to try to find out. So in my experience, ChatGPT is a little bit more analytical. Claude is a bit more, I feel like it has a much more holistic approach to the information, but that's just personal. It's almost like they have personalities, but I don't mean to anthropomorphize. But I have not played with Google's Gemini as much, nor Facebook or the Mistral system. But the two open source systems they can really be, you know, if you're working with a developer or yourself are working to train those models, you can start to tailor it more towards your preferences. And I think that really is where parliaments will go in the future. But as far as the pros and cons of the various models, I will say, you know, Gemini has had some news stories about its responses being, I think they have really tried to address bias, and in some cases that has impacted the responses that it produces in ways that in some cases have made them in some cases less useful. So I think right now I would strongly suggest making them all compete with each other. And sometimes I'll take an answer from ChatGPT and put it into Claude and say, how would you improve this answer? Or please critique this response. So I find it helpful to play them against each other. Let's see, I'm looking at other questions here. How can AI be used for Excel, Google Sheets to help create functional sheets based on your specific needs? Oh my goodness, Maria Boida. This has been one of my revelations in being able to just go into ChatGPT or Claude and say, how do I write a formula to do X? Because, you know, but just being able to copy a formula and dropping it into Excel or into Google Sheets has been fantastic. If you are working with Google Gemini, it's my understanding that it can work more directly with your information that's in a Google Drive or Google Sheets. Same with Microsoft 365. If it's got access to your Excel sheets, it can give you suggestions right there within the system. But again, I think it just depends on which service you're using. I'm still in the copying and pasting back into the spreadsheet, and it is an absolute game changer. Let's see. Say that you work with an NDA. How would you limit the use of AI tools, and are there ways to work around that? So there are tools for stripping out personally identifiable information that you can use to basically clean your information before you put it into a chat window. I'm not quite sure with an NDA if there might be things that are not technically personally identifiable information, but trade secrets or something that you have committed to not revealing. I think in that case, you would not want to put information under the NDA into a model. Let's see. Julian Robinson asks, are we aware of jurisdictions that have implemented regulations regarding the use of AI in political campaigns? I actually stay away from the campaign side of things. I think there may be some proposed regulations out there about disclosure, but I am not familiar with that. I do have a link that I can share. I think the National Democratic Institution is tracking, and maybe the Bertelsmann Foundation is tracking the use of AI in political campaigns. And so I'll go back and talk to our team and grab those links, and we can share in the follow-up. Rosita Farrell asks, the fear of using AI in small parliaments is the idea that AI will replace their function as opposed to enhancing them. I actually think, I mean, this is a philosophical question and we're all going to learn together, but I actually see, especially for small parliaments, or especially for members who have small staff, who have to read lots of documents or process lots of studies or stay up to date on lots of trends. In order to do all of that, it takes a lot of time away from interactions with your constituents or with other members of parliament, where you need to negotiate or make deals, or even hearings where you're hearing from actual experts. So I actually see the opportunity for these tools to handle a lot of the processing of information and raising out the issues that really need attention, including like the constituent correspondence that we looked at before, and give you back some time to do the things that only humans can do. That is my hope, and I think that's the spirit with which these tools need to be evaluated for sure. So I have a few more slides, Alisha and Derek, if just to jump in with a few international examples, and maybe to tease up what might be a future conversation going more into depth about more custom applications of these tools in parliaments worldwide. So I actually had a conversation with the head of innovation for the Norwegian Parliament, who showed me the tool that they're working on. They actually started this digital supply chain for legislation program before generative AI was a big had really become so prominent, and now they have gone and reworked the project to incorporate generative AI at many of the steps along the way. So the key to their project, which they're going to launch next October, is really going from a paper-centric process, going from documents to data, and thinking about legislation in their system as data, and thinking about how it can go from a proposal from the government into the parliamentary process and back to the government to be implemented. How can that as data be available at each step of the way to the people who have control of it at each different part of those processes and seamlessly flow into the implementation system when it's time for it to go back to government and be implemented. We all know, I think we were all jealous of Estonia and their digitization efforts. This is above is a timeline of some of their work, and they are constant. I mean, anytime a new technology comes out, you can bet that Estonia is experimenting with it. I will say some of their first experiments with generative AI were in the Microsoft 365 platform. They have allowed OpenAI's API to have access to all of their archived materials. So now anyone can interact with their archived documents through a chatbot, which is a pretty intuitive use of these tools. But they're also working to incorporate generative AI into their drafting and summarizing and analysis, and even their constituent engagement processes, and are working on that as we speak. And then I'm sure many of you are familiar with Luis Kimade and Bússola Tech down in Brazil. They just had a wonderful review of Chile's Caminar program, where they are, you can see over here on the left, they're rolling out custom tools in a very methodical way, going from legislative tracking to regulatory impact assessment to constitutional support to a legal doctrine assistant to the managing and budgeting of amendments, et cetera. So this is a staged custom program that leverages retrieval augmented generation, which again, I think that's something we should talk about in the next conversation, as a really custom tool for that parliament or the Congress. Brazil is also innovating. You saw the list from the analysis by the different models. So there are some good examples out there in the U.S. The House and Senate are experimenting. They're holding hearings. They're issuing guidelines. They're taking a bit of a more cautious approach, and looking for examples from around the world, and also to understand how offices are thinking about using these tools. For me, the key is to move from what we have now, which is just a supportive tool that augments human capacity, as we talked about, and helps humans go do more of the human stuff. I think there will be things in the future that we automate, like tracking bill progress and even modeling potential outcomes of legislation. And then in the far future, these tools may transform the way we make laws, the way we perform oversight, the way we interact with constituents. But I think that's a longer term thing. So that is the end of my slides, but I'm very happy to take more questions. And then I will just flag, we've got a newsletter where we're trying to track what different parliaments are doing around the world and share lessons. So would love for you to subscribe to that if it's of interest. But Alisha and Derek, I'll toss back to you, or for any more questions if helpful.
I see one question that just popped in. Is there AI specific to library?
Meaning perhaps legislative libraries. There is, I think lots of different libraries and archives are experimenting. I recently saw an example from the UK's archives where they are experimenting. Here's actually something I had not shared, but this is a prototype that we worked on at POPVOX Foundation, taking all of the CRS reports, the Congressional Research Service reports that are available publicly, and creating a chatbot that just interacts with those reports. So let's see if we search. Oh, I have to refresh the page. If we search here, it should bring up all of the relevant CR. Oh, I didn't spell it right. CRS reports related to the topic that you enter. And then you can interact with the reports and, have it build you a new, oh, here they are. So you'll see we've also got a training window. So the most recent report here is from 2022. But now I could ask questions about this report. I could have it summarize this report or write a memo about this report. And the reason that we built this is we wanted members of Congress and staff to understand that it is possible. To at least it will link to the report, that it is possible to constrain the inputs of various systems so that the training information for these systems to get output that is specific to your context. But that again will require various institutions investing in tools that are specifically for their own context. A good question from ParlAmericas about many of the AI models being based in the US and France and regulations governing those models. Can governments in these countries access the models or the information stored in them at any time? I don't think anybody knows. So we don't yet have new legislation. And so many of the models are based in the US and we don't yet have new laws governing these models. The old laws apply, which we still haven't passed laws that govern social media. We're using old publishing laws to govern social media. So I think the question of how these models are regulated, what requirements for use are, if there are mandates on terms of service or accessibility or transparency, that is all being debated now. I think it's possible we will see legislation in the US next year or the next year, but it is certainly a live policy discussion. The open source model, so for example, Mistral, which is based in France, and even Llama, those models you can go in and see what the weights are. So like how the algorithms are designed and what it prioritizes, or what the process is for producing the various outputs. But you can access it. I'm not sure that I can make heads or tails of it if I get in there. So those are the kinds of things that I think for proper understanding and potential regulation of these models, it will take expert oversight bodies that are that have the experts who can understand the nuances of the design of the models, the data that's in there, etc. But early days.
Perfect. Well, I'm not sure. Certainly, we're still open there. If we have a few more minutes, if anybody has a question, but if not, I will just say a great big thank you to Marci from POPVOX Foundation. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this with us here. As Derek mentioned at the beginning, and Marci also did, I mean, this idea came from, we were so pleased to collaborate with the House Democracy Partnership and POPVOX and a number of other entities all together in Miami earlier in September. Some of you were able to be there with us, where we we took on a big topic in 2 days, digital economy, which we realized is the economy, honestly, because everything interacts with digital. In that meeting, however, we did see there was certainly a real interest around artificial intelligence tools, and that led us to say, okay, what can we do next? This was really intended to be just what it was. Thank you, Marci. A starting point. I've been also going to many meetings now about artificial intelligence, as many of you have. And what I started to realize is until I started playing a little bit with these tools, I was not understanding truly what I was listening to in different meetings, where they were really getting into how to regulate or create policies in Parliament. And I thought, until I can play with these tools, I don't even understand these conversations. And that's what led us to think, okay, wait a second, let's convene a meeting for the Caribbean where it's really just about this, a starting point of even an invitation to play with the tools, but play with them safely, because they are public tools. And so that's the one thing that we all have to remember. And until you really think about it, you kind of go, all right, it's like, Google, like how many things do I search in Google all the time, right? And I don't really think about the fact that that data is always being collected. And so now if you have these very powerful tools that we're feeding information into, is to be cognizant of, these are public tools. So as Marci rightly said, please remember, there's just the kind of data you put in or you strip out that personal data. I cannot emphasize enough. I thank you, Marci, for saying it. That's been my experience as well. Treat it like an eager intern. Super interesting what it can give you. Fun ways that you can get some information easily, or even, like you said, get a formula for Excel rather than figuring it out. I use it to help my daughter with math questions that I can no longer remember how to do myself, and it breaks things down for us. These are great ways to use these tools. But I've also had the experience where, not once, but several times now, where the tool will almost feel the need to please me by inventing information, right? Where I have to go back and say, that doesn't seem accurate. And it comes back and says, you're very perceptive. I thought you might want it to have something. I didn't know the answer. So eager intern, eh? We've all had an intern like that too, who has tried to, I really wanted to please you, so I gave you some information, even if it's not the information. You just really need to interact with it that way. I also found in a translation sense, and no, interpretation. There's some organizations trying AI interpretation, and you wouldn't know if you don't speak both languages, right? But if you had that what you're getting interpreted is not actually accurate. If you speak both languages, and what I learned is if it doesn't quite understand, some of these tools now, they don't quite understand the accent, they start inventing. As opposed to saying, I don't know, Marci, you work more with the IT industry. Maybe you can feed back this feedback to train the models to just say, I cannot interpret this, as opposed to inventing a story so that the person thinks that they're getting an accurate interpretation and it's not accurate, right? Like it's so, but I can't emphasize enough, colleagues, please, the tools are amazing, but it's an eager intern. You really need to check if you haven't played with them yet and you start playing with it, go in with that mindset, because it's not feeding you accurate necessarily. For a next step, I think there will be interest. You can all tell me. If not, people always WhatsApp me with their interest, so I'm delighted to hear from you all. If you're interested in learning more about how other parliaments in time are going to be, are now moving to the next phase of developing their own internal models. Okay, because there are larger parliaments that we know are doing this. Brazil, there's European parliaments, Chile, they are. And in fact, what I've learning, especially at a recent session I was in, that there's been a lot of sharing. This is what we know this about parliaments. They are willing to share, truly. I know Chile has made it clear, Brazil has made it clear. Anybody wants the information about what they're doing. They want the code, right? Like they want to have a starting point. They're happy to share this information. I want to remind you that the Interparliamentary Union has created what they call their tech hubs around the world, and the tech hub for the Caribbean is in Trinidad and Tobago. And I also know that Trinidad and Tobago, as the tech hub for the Caribbean, has said that they are learning about how countries in Europe and countries in Latin America are using and creating these models, and they will be there as a resource for you. So if you want to know who to get in contact with there, yes. The library question, a very recent session I was in, it was from the European Union Parliament's library that they have created a chat GBT, I don't know if I had the right terminology, but yes, like a chat GBT or a GBT internal to them around how to archive, organize, and interact with the entire repository of their library. Not only have they done this, they assured me actually it wasn't even that costly, because I asked that question. I'm always thinking of my colleagues in the Caribbean when I'm in these sessions, and I'm like, what about cost? And he said, in fact, it is actually less than $12,000 to have set up the entire thing. All right, plus human time, but actual hard cost, $12,000. Not only that, they fully shared this code, everything they did freely with Chile, and Chile is now looking to apply it. And I was assured that if anybody in the Caribbean would like to have a conversation to figure out how this is being done, and they will just give it to you if you want to look at then how to and talk through how to maybe look at applying this. They're happy to do so. So please understand through ParlAmericas, through IPU, working with our partners like POPVOX and HEP, we are all here to be your community, to support you in this journey. So whatever you need, you just, if I can't, I can't, right? But please ask the question. I don't know what I can do to connect dots, to help bring up a next training, to help organize that you are meeting with the counterparts in other places. The Estonia example, I just have to do a shout out. I do know Hannes from Estonia, who has set up, actually, it's the e-governance academy, and they even have a location in Jamaica. So they are looking to work in the Caribbean and support parliaments and governments in the Caribbean around learning from the experience of Estonia. If you would like that information, we can share it with you. I think that was my summary of the things that came out of this session. On time,
Alisha,
colleagues. Please, Marci.
I just wanted to say, so I dropped some links to the European Parliament project that you mentioned into chat. There's also an incredible story that I don't know if you know about this one, but actually the beginnings of language translation models a long time ago actually started with the record from the Canadian Hansard, because the Parliament of Canada had put so many years of professional translation into French English translation. So one of the earliest examples of computer learning for translation came from parliamentary data. So there is much to learn from parliaments for these technologies. And I also just want to mention that one of the proposals coming out of the Miami event was for digitization projects and collaborations for the Caribbean, and that I think those conversations continue. So for anyone on the call who would like to be a part of those ongoing conversations, would love to connect to you. So please reach out.
Perfect. Thank you, Marci. Everyone, so you know, we will be, Marci has committed, like, we will share the PowerPoint material so that you have it, but also there's some other links and things so Marci will get this to us. We will circulate it to everyone who participated here, so you have the information as well coming to you via email. I think that will make it a wrap unless anybody has something they need to say right now. Marci's in an airport, so we want to let her now move on with her. She took a red eye and still delivered an amazing presentation. So again, a big applause for Marci, virtual applause for Marci.
Thank you all.
We're going to say thank you.
Bye-bye.